Welcome to Inside College Admission, conversations with admission leaders about matters affecting the college-going process. My name is Peter Van Buskirk, and I'm joined today by Rick Clark, who is the Director of Undergraduate Admission at Georgia Tech, and also an author recently, a very successful author. Good to have you, Rick.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity.
I suspect you probably feel like your world's turned a little upside down right now from what you experienced over the last several years. In early April.
Just a little. Yeah. It does feel like that. I keep expecting someone to, pull back the curtain on this, but you're right. Everything's changed, and certainly at work and at home as well. So everybody just trying to do the best to make adjustments.
Absolutely. Now, I would imagine by your comment there that you might be working from home quite a lot then?
Yes, we are pretty much fully remote at this point. Able to go into the office if we absolutely need to, but really being discouraged to not do that.
So a lot of Zoom meetings then?
Man, way too many, I'll tell you. It's exhausting. It is exhausting. I feel like it's helpful. Obviously, better than just regular calls, but at the same time, there's just so much follow-up that needs to happen afterwards. So it's not doubling the work, but it certainly, I think, increases the work. Absolutely.
Well, I wonder if you could just kind of give us a sense of what the campus is like right now. And one of the points of this series of interviews is I'm hoping that we can kind of humanize this process for consumers so that they can understand better what's going on the other side of the conversation with admission folks and campuses, et cetera. So what's it like on your campus now when you get a chance to see it and experience it?
Yeah, so you mean normal Georgia Tech, not coronavirus Georgia Tech.
Well, no, because of the coronavirus.
Okay, I see.
A ghost town, or
yeah, it is. No, I mean, we right now very few people on campus. I mean, there are a couple, absolute kind of must continue grants and some research that's continuing, but in most cases that's not true. There are some administrators and faculty members who are going into campus again, either just for absolutely essential items or equipment in some cases. But otherwise, I was in the other day for a couple hours, and I think I saw 3 people walking through what is normally a very heavily trafficked part of campus. So it's extremely quiet. It's very odd. There's a guy named DJ who is kind of one of the groundskeepers that works in our area. And I was texting with him night before last a little bit. And, he said he's going to be going on to like a every other week type schedule, so just across the board, everybody is pretty much at home if they can be, just from a safety and wellness standpoint.
I would imagine that through your credential review process, you do pretty much of your work online. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. So you can your staff can work remotely anyhow with that online capacity. So they probably don't feel quite as displaced as they might have otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, and we were saying recently, I mean, we're fortunate for a couple things. I mean, one, we have 4 people who always are fully remote of our 32 full-time folks. And we've really been leaning on them to kind of coach us through this. Everybody works a little bit remotely. I mean, we run, we call it PBR. It's just, a lot of people call it CBE, committee-based evaluation. And so through a lot of our year, at least once a week, most of our staff is working from home. So they're used to that. It's just, there is a difference, between fully remote and partially remote. And obviously, for a lot of us, we're also juggling theoretically homeschooling or online schooling our kids while we're doing all of that. So yeah, it's been interesting to say the least. But I think to your point of humanizing, I mean, kids walking through the background of people's video screens and, people just doing their best. And
Yeah,
so it's been an opportunity also, I think, to get to know one another even more, and just to be flexible, and exercise grace with one another as we're doing our best to get through it.
excellent. Well, what do you find are the biggest pandemic-related challenges that you're facing right now, especially as you're coming to the finish line with the class of 2024?
Yeah. I would say from a campus standpoint, the biggest challenge is just figuring out how can we do this well in terms of educating our current students. There's no doubt about that. And we're really kind of in week one on that, because when spring break fell, we're really just getting into it. From a admissions standpoint, I would say, honestly, just way more questions than answers. I mean, we're looking at our model and thinking there's no way it's going to hold up. And so what do? Do you go earlier in April to your wait list, assuming that deposits aren't going to trend as they have? Do you over subscribe even with those deposits, assuming there will be more melt? And, with so many questions right now around the issuance of visas for international students. So, we're speculating and trying to figure out what's the kind of best path forward in the absence of a lot of concrete answers. And I know everybody can say that about their own lives,
Sure.
period, at this point.
For the benefit of those listening, you mentioned models, and I think over the last 15 to 20 years, higher education and people like yourself in higher education have become really good at modeling enrollment behaviors. Because history and you can build upon historical outcomes.
Yeah.
I would imagine now that given the variables in play that you're operating blindly.
I think so. I mean, honestly, I feel like if you talk to anybody around the country, they're pretty much acknowledging that. I was on a call earlier today with a colleague from University of Georgia and another colleague from Georgia State University. And we're all in sort of different positions, I guess, as far as the landscape of higher education is concerned. But the one commonality is none of us believe that we really know what these next couple of weeks or months are going to hold. And to your point, that's exactly right. I mean, there's some variance, of course, in percentages, but largely we can say, this demographic, right? So an in-state student for engineering usually yields at X, plus or minus 1.2. A student from New Jersey for biology, and you can kind of just go down the line. But this year, with all the factors that families are going to be weighing, where are our doctors? And am I still comfortable with sending you more than 200 miles away? Or do I now want you to be a drive away instead of a flight away? I mean, these are the kind of things that there's just no way to predict it. It's a little disconcerting, without a doubt.
I'll bet. And, as you know, I once sat in your seat at a different institution and always enjoyed this time of the year, but right now I don't miss it at all.
Yeah. And not just from the unpredictability of it, but frankly, I think all of us that are in higher education obviously are in it, because we believe in education, we love students, we enjoy the campus environment. And so I have to say, April is one of my favorite months because, we've come through reading season and that brings its own challenges, and then just the weather and all of that. And you come to April and all these kids are coming to visit, you got your admitted students coming, you've got sort of juniors and sophomores on spring break, and the weather's improving, and it's just a great time of year. And so, it's sort of a double dagger on that. The uncertainty plus just, not getting to enjoy a time of year that's usually so good.
Well, it's that time of year where you're going to throw a big party and you've made all the plans and now it's time, but you can't do it. I can imagine.
Yes.
Got to be very frustrating. Now, I just want to pause on this thought for a second in terms of the modeling predictability and some degree of uncertainty. Even before the coronavirus visited our population, there were a lot of concerns about what the Department of Justice's actions from this last fall would mean with regard to enrollment strategies as well. And just sort of superficially, that means that students would have more flexibility outside of deadlines to kind of move their interest among colleges after they've been accepted, et cetera, which kind of throws the common reply date to the wind. You see, I mean, I would think that given what's going on now with the coronavirus, there's more of an opportunity for families to say, well, you know, I'm going to just look around a little bit longer after May 1st. How do you read that?
I agree. I agree. I think that to your point with DOJ and the changes to the timeline and a little bit of the competition, I know for us anyway, pre-coronavirus, our head was already in a space of let's anticipate a little bit more melt. And, you know, if someone's listening and doesn't know that term as much, it's this idea that, you know, you get your yield, you have your deposits, and some percentage of those don't show up on campus for a variety of reasons. You know, they may come off of a wait list at another school, or they end up deciding it's not a good financial fit, et cetera. So I think most schools were already in the headspace of let's presume a bit higher melt. But to your point, I think, yes, that this just compounds that. Obviously, we've seen a number, I think 300 plus now schools have already moved to June 1. To be honest, I think a lot of those probably already were doing that. They just sort of formalized it, which is totally fine. I think that's great in a way because it demonstrates, again, like not all schools are the same. That's a good thing.
Excuse me, by the way,
you know,
June 1 as an enrollment deposit deadline?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The other thing that I think you're going to see this summer, and I don't love this for families, but I'm sure for some it's either a non-issue or not a big deal. But I think that schools, I know Georgia Tech, and I think a lot of schools like us, were probably already planning on holding on to their wait list a little bit longer than normal. I know we had talked about that because usually our concept is it's like a bunch of dominoes, and, you know, maybe the Ivies go to their wait list and they take students from us, and then we go to our wait list and we take students from the next school. And, you know, you sort of need to play your role in that ecosystem, I believe, through the summer, because if you do that, then, you know, just responsibly lets kids move on to another school maybe that they've been deposited to. I think most schools were probably saying, hey, we better wait and hold this a little longer because of DOJ changes. And now with coronavirus, I just feel like the wait list is going to be prolonged further into the summer. And I know we and a number of our colleagues that I've talked to around the country have built even bigger wait lists than normal to protect the class based on either unpredictability of yield or higher melt. So I don't love that because, you know, the wait list in general is a rough spot to be on, especially for a long period of time.
Absolutely. Now, another compounding factor here is the impact of the health crisis on the economy. And I suspect that as you've built your class, you've built the class with an understanding of what it's going to cost to bring in this class. You know which students need assistance and how to respond to their needs based on their 2018 tax returns. Things have changed in 2 weeks.
Oh man.
So what do you anticipate? Are there going to be a lot of families maybe they are contacting you already saying, well, you know, we didn't apply for financial aid, but I just lost my job. I need money. How's that going to work? Especially since you're not on campus. Maybe that's not a factor.
Yeah. I mean, I think the not on campus thing, surprisingly, for financial aid, at least at Georgia Tech, I think they're realizing actually, you know, we might be more responsive because we're not dealing with quite as much disturbance as we all know occurs sort of in a normal workplace and office setting. You know, and I won't go on this too long, but I think there are some silver linings to coronavirus and some of the lessons we're learning, and maybe the way we use space and, you know, kind of work going forward could be an alteration that's positive. But yes, you're right. I mean, and that was, I mean, ironically, the whole concept of prior year was things statistically don't change that much. And, you know, I mean, we're dealing with like the biggest, I would think, you know, financial curveball in maybe kind of modern history here. You know, and so, yes, I think that this really throws a lot of things in the air. And the challenge, of course, is, you know, you try to put your money on the table for your admits to the best of your ability and give the best package you can. And if too high a number of students or families come back saying things have changed, you know, the extent to which you're able to do that is going to vary by college, but very few are going to be able to probably meet the need at the level they would like to. Obviously, we know there's some small echelon of schools that, you know, would be able to continue to do that. And this is where, I mean, you know, certainly coming out of the 2008, 2009 recession, the mentality of families started to shift. And I think this is only going to either exacerbate or heighten that factor, and rightly so. But there again, I mean, and we're seeing it, like we're getting a bunch of students who are ED admits other places that are coming back to us now and saying, could you reinstate my application? You know, because things have changed so much, and my financial situation is very different, as well as potentially distance from home being more of a concern. And I don't know. I hope that colleagues around the country and schools will just be as agile and flexible and understanding as possible. It's just not a normal year.
Well, certainly, and as you're talking, it just occurs to me there are just going to be aftershock after aftershock that are unanticipated from, you know, the big hit that we've experienced over the last month. So, well, with regard to the kids you've admitted, and again, it's a time to celebrate and encourage and feel, you know, a lot of good things with these young people. How, in light of the fact that you're not able to do the things on campus that you'd normally do, how are you accommodating these kids now? They've just been admitted, they're thrilled, they want to maybe come talk to people, see the campus again, stay overnight. Well, you know, a lot of that can't happen. So what's plan B?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, again, in conversations with colleagues, and as I referenced earlier, just the meeting I had this morning, I mean, we were all saying, like, this is also, I think, highlighted some of the things where it's like, wow, why have we not been doing some of these things before? So I actually started a document for my staff called Things We Don't Want to Forget from Coronavirus. In other words, what are those things we've had to pivot on, but they're great long-term also. They're not just Band-Aids. These are actually good long-term strategies. And I mean, I will say, as much as there's anxiety and fear and concern, and I think that's all very understandable and necessary for people to allow themselves to feel, I think it's also good for us to focus on the silver lining or the hope or the positives. And one of those, frankly, is the fact that you are seeing a lot of schools, Georgia Tech being one of them, where maybe in the past we had a couple recorded webinars that were out there that kids could access. I mean, now what you're seeing is schools are putting a lot of great content out there, either in a live event, which we're doing. We're putting the recorded stuff out still, but we're also doing moderated live chats and presentations, but then also making our students available more for individual conversations. And in the past, that was almost exclusively reserved to either being on campus or through calls, phone calls. So I think you're seeing schools leverage their students in very interesting kind of, you know, authentic ways. And also doing the same with, you know, some faculty and other departments. And that definitely has been the case at Georgia Tech. We've had departments say, how can we engage with these students since they can't come physically see us? And I'm really hopeful that will extend and continue in years well past this. Wow. So those are a couple ways, I mean, in addition to the things you would expect. But I guess the last thing I'll say is, I mean, we're also realizing, like, this is a medium where students are comfortable. This is a medium that I mean, we're the ones thrown off by it. We're the ones that are, you know, foreigners to this. They're the digital natives. And, you know, we're finding that they're very engaged and seem to be really enjoying it. Now, of course, everybody wants to come physically touch and see, and that's unfortunate. But maybe it's not as bad as we, the adults and quote unquote professionals, think here.
We still have to remind the 17-year-olds that their email accounts they need to check their email accounts pretty regularly, though.
Yeah. No doubt.
I mean, they're well into the digital world, but I think they've forgotten that email is still where many of the. Well, to kind of follow this up a little bit, it sounds like, you know, Georgia Tech is moving creatively and aggressively into a new paradigm, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. But is there any sense, any conversation on your campus about, when things might open up so that you can accommodate visitors? Or is that
Yeah,
just
there's a lot of conversation. I mean, honestly, most of the conversation to this point has been about our own classes, and I mean, I guess those two things go hand in hand in that, that would be quote unquote gatherings of more than 10 or gatherings of more than 50. You've seen a lot of quotas out there. I mean, right now we're talking about, okay, summer is supposed to start for returning students in kind of early May. We actually bring in 20% of our first year students in mid-June. And all of that is being debated right now. I mean, honestly, for me, it is very difficult to imagine that anyone is physically on campus in any type of critical mass before June 1. But I think we really need to make a decision on this soon so that students feel comfortable depositing for summer. If you don't know what it's going to be, then of course there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. And that's where we might have to be really flexible with our deadline for May 1 if we can't make some of these decisions sooner than later.
Well, and I want to transition a little bit now, since we're talking into the summer. We've been focusing on the students that you're trying to enroll now. The kids have been admitted, but you can't wait to start with next year's class either. All the juniors who've been kind of chomping at the bit, or at least their parents have, to get this process started. They're concerned about when can I visit? How do I approach colleges? There are a whole lot of questions that they have right now. So, college fairs, things that we've done traditionally, open houses, your staff visiting high schools, got to be all up in the air right now. So what sort of contingencies are you beginning to consider for your outreach to next year's applicants?
Right. Yes. I mean, gosh, honestly, to be completely honest with you, we have not thought a ton about, what does that travel piece look like in the fall? Yeah. I think that we're just sort of in a wait and see mode. I guess in most years, we don't really start doing much until mid-August. And so we're looking at that as, all right, we still have, a quarter here to make some of those determinations. But I do think some of what we've learned on the yield side will inform that. I mean, even today we had a good conversation about this idea of, regional webinars. We have a person who lives full-time in California, and she does her best to get up and down the West Coast, but why not try to do something specifically geared online for prospects on the West Coast? What's the East Coast like? What's Atlanta like? Questions that a kid from Georgia wouldn't have, that would be really helpful. And so again, this is pointing to the fact that maybe definitely Georgia Tech, but I would say a lot of schools around the country have been a bit too myopic with the way that or traditional, maybe is the best way to put that, with the way we've approached some of these recruitment opportunities. And this is, this is informative for us going forward. Yeah, in terms of, and then beyond that, another piece is search and the fact that all these test cancellations, one of the ways obviously schools identify prospects is by buying test scores. And that's gone out the window. I noticed that College Board is starting to make some of these names available just for registrants. But if you're trying to, that works for some demographics. You're trying to get like women from Massachusetts for biology, you can still get those names, but it takes away some of the, criteria that schools would use the test scores to drill down into.
Yeah. Well, and the whole conversation about search and the role it's held in the recruitment process and the direction that it may go, especially in light of some lawsuits, civil suits on the West Coast, is perhaps for another day, but that's a very dynamic area as well. But speaking of tests, kids are stressed now because they can't take a May SAT. I guess June tests are up in the air. What do you tell a kid who's trying to figure out how to prep for testing at this point? I mean, are you considering any alternatives in your credentialing process as well, or you're going to hold fast with test requirements and just take what you get?
Well, that again is a great question. Just recently, the Chancellor of the University System of Georgia for the entering class of 2020 said that test scores won't be required. So in a way, made the entire system test optional for the incoming students. Now that doesn't necessarily hold for 2021, but it does demonstrate maybe some level of flexibility to have that conversation around whether or not tests are necessary. I noticed that today, Rhodes just put out a 3-year pilot. I've seen a couple either go full. I was at Boston University, I think, the other day. I think the concept of a pilot could be worth exploration. I think another option, at least, I would think for a lot of publics, would be you could go test blind or test optional for application and admission, even if your system ultimately required test scores for matriculation, if that makes sense. You could not use them through the admission process and then tell students, ultimately, though, you're going to have to demonstrate, some level of competency in a standardized manner for matriculation. So, I'm hopeful there will be some more robust conversations around, test flexibility, plattering of choices on how you do that. But there's no doubt, as you well know, I mean, the trend has been towards test optional, and I think this will accelerate, and already has, and will continue to accelerate that through the summer. Similarly, there's probably going to be an acceleration of school mergers or closures because of coronavirus. Again, as you said, possibly a topic for another day.
Well, sure, and just a footnote on that observation. I think you're dead on. But the speculation about those closures or mergers was ongoing before coronavirus even, and they're just, I think there are a lot of schools that are kind of on the fringe that are teetering economically that may just find that this the health crisis is the final push. So yeah, we can pick that up another time then. But I want to kind of go back to a conversation we had earlier about the paradigm and the whole disruption to the college search and selection process is changing the way you have to deal with students and parents right now, because you can't see them face to face. You can't have them on their campus. But again, it sounds like you guys are moving pretty creatively into the future. And I like your notion of keeping a list of things we need to remember after the crisis. So do you think we're going to recognize business as usual in 6 weeks or 6 months or 8 months, a year? Or is it going to be just a different look altogether?
I think that there will be some real shifts. For instance, I think some schools will realize, wow, part of our enrollment, quote unquote, crisis has been because we've been way too traditional about how we've approached educating students. And, can we grow our enrollment and be more creative, in some type of a hybrid environment, in some type of an alternating semester, option. I think that even if that might not be across your entire curriculum, it might be in certain programs, especially if you could be more flexible with the way you model paying, the tuition scaling, right? So, I mean, as an example, not a real example, but as a hypothetical example, one of our most in-demand bachelor's programs is computer science. Well, there's only so many seats, there's only so many professors, but could you do a hybrid online in-person computer science program, just like you see at the MBA level, with executive MBAs, with flexible MBAs, evening MBAs, et cetera, online totally. I think that's where you'll see some real switches. And then what I think will be, I don't know, like unfortunate, and if you have the right attitude, I guess comical, will be, what are the things that we go right back to that we shouldn't, like what are those kind of like long-standing, sort of almost ridiculous, outdated MOs that we just revert back to when this is all over? I hope very few, but there will be some.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned at the outset that among other things, you were an author. You and Brennan Barnard just penned a very successful book, The Truth About College Admission. It's been out for what, not even a year yet? Is it? Right. You're going to have to rewrite it now real quickly?
It's interesting thinking about that, because we were having a conversation, Brennan and I, the other night, like a lot of the way that book sets up is around families having better conversations. And obviously the only way you have a good conversation is by having time. And so we were actually saying, we're kind of hopeful that, this will allow that time. And I mean, I've got two young kids, 11 and 9, and I mean, we're getting great time together, and I'm really, I mean, I don't know what this means for the book sale, but like the questions in there don't change. The questions I think in there are solid and helpful. But yes, there are definitely some parts of that where it's like, okay, well, yeah, that should definitely be 2.0 going forward.
But by the way, you mentioned having children at home. I think I saw on your Twitter feed that you've got some budding chemists at home.
Right. Exactly.
It's got to be fun for you. One other thing that I observed recently too is that it looks like your campus has been geared up to contribute in a pretty meaningful way to the production of some shields, some health shields that can be distributed into hospitals for healthcare individuals. Very impressive. Is there anything you can say about that?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things just I love about working at Georgia Tech is, one of our kind of core missions is to improve the human condition. And right now there's obviously nothing more pressing than this. And so you asked earlier about like who's on campus, and very, very few, but that is one provisioned group that are still there trying to meet some of these needs, both for the healthcare workers and the safety of healthcare workers as it relates to the shortage in masks, and then certainly on the more mechanical side of things when it as it relates to ventilators. And the other thing where Georgia Tech is I think really entering into this conversation is we have, I mean, I'm not big on rankings, but we have the #1 program in the country for industrial engineering, which is all about like supply chain, and logistics and efficiency. And so Georgia Tech's industrial engineering professors have been consulted at the highest levels in terms of how do we get these type of critical devices or equipment, to the right people at the right time to deal with the type of load, and how do we even, go about predicting that. So, I mean, I really am proud to be part of an institution that has a long history of kind of being part of the solution, and especially at critical times in history. So yeah, that's a little bit of what's going on here.
Congratulations to you and your colleagues on campus for all the good work they're doing. Before we wrap up, I just want to give you an opportunity to maybe throw out any additional thoughts you have. If one of those young people in your house may not be 17 quite yet, but that day will come quickly. What would you be saying to a 17-year-old who's just getting started in the process and is feeling like the clouds are so dark over everything that's going on that they just can't see what's going on, and they don't see a path forward? So how would you advise that person?
Yeah. I mean, I would say probably the thing that would always be true, and it's particularly true right now. In fact, I think there's a unique opportunity right now because things have really slowed down. I mean, if I try to put myself in the shoes of a 17-year-old, whatever you're into, if it's music, if it's sports, I mean, all that has basically stopped and you're not as busy. And so this is actually, I would say, an opportunity to start where most students should, but very few do, by actually looking at yourself and asking some questions around, what do I want? I mean, what do I want my life to look like? What do I really care about? Who are the type of people that I want to surround myself with? And let that inform you, because the truth is that we are going to come back. I mean, colleges are going to reopen, and they're going to make adjustments as necessary to enroll classes. And something students forget, unfortunately, because the press focuses so much on the highly selective schools, is colleges need students, and now more than ever. And so I would actually tell a junior, take heart in two things. One, you have some time that most students don't usually get to actually deeply think about who you are and what you want and where that should lead you. And then two, to your point and what we've discussed earlier, I mean, these models are really up in the air. I think you're going to see a lot of schools maybe opening up more seats or being more generous with their admit. So if they feel that they're the ones that are taking the brunt of this, I actually might reverse that on them a little bit and say, don't jump to that conclusion so quickly. start with yourself and then wait for the schools to come after that.
So in a sense, out of adversity comes opportunity, and
without a question.
Be ready to seize that. Well, this is great, Rick. I really appreciate your taking time to, out of a busy day of other Zoom conferences, to spend some time with us and share with us what's going on at Georgia Tech. Is there a particular website or content that you'd like to refer any listeners to who would like to know more about what's going on at Georgia Tech right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So from an admission standpoint, just our homepage there, admission.gatech.edu. The other two things I would point to is we write pretty much a weekly blog that's not about Georgia Tech. Just want to be clear. It's general advice and tips and insight. And about a month ago, we started accompanying that with a podcast, which is called College Admission Brief, and it's out there on iTunes and Spotify. And it's really geared towards students. It's every episode is less than 10 minutes, but it's supposed to just sort of do the quick hits for students that week about kind of what they might need to know or be thinking about. And so we're hopeful some of that content is informative to students. And right now, obviously with coronavirus, we're pretty much tackling that head on.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, I really appreciate the leadership you and Georgia Tech are providing in this area, and the kind of content you're making available to young people and their parents at a critical time in their decision-making process. Thank you again for joining us and sharing your thoughts. And to those who are listening to this webinar, thank you for checking in with us. Be safe and have a great day.